Welcome to another Monday Blitz. I want to ask you a question as we get started. Have you ever felt like you were in the desert with your relationship with God, where there seemed to be a disconnect, a separation from God, and you just weren't sure why it was there, but it had taken place? Maybe you're even in that feeling right now. What do you do about it? What do you do to re-engage and experience God? As I read through 1 Samuel 7, the temptation is to see this as just a quick get-through chapter to get into more of the ministry of Samuel as the prophet. But as I began reading this beginning part of chapter 7, it really made me stop and think. There's a description here of 20 years where God's place of representation, the Ark of the Covenant, was basically in somebody's backyard, sitting there with inactivity. The place where God had designed for Israel to collectively meet with him wasn't even being used. The tabernacle was in Shiloh, apparently not being used, and now here the Ark of the Covenant is in a nice protected spot, but there's no communication going on between God and his people. There's this disconnect. And it lasts 20 years. I thought the 7 months description of while the Ark of the Covenant was with the Philistines was a long time. But here now we have this 20-year separation. And I thought about my own life. I thought about the experiences I have seen others go through. When we get in those places of silence, of a desert experience, it's not that God has left. It's that we have chosen to disconnect. I don't believe that God ever intends times of disconnect between he and us. I believe God, in his mind, expects us to daily interact, daily have a connection with him. And yet we have throughout Scripture and in this story, 20-year description of how the entire nation pulls away. Now granted, they set themselves up for it. Eli and his sons, corrupt as they were allowed by the people to continue this false worship. The people turned to the nations around them and tried to interact as if they were like the Philistines and actually took on the worship of the gods of the Philistines. And I think about, what is it that we do? What are the things we try to connect with that are literally pulling us away from our relationship with God to the point where there is nothing going on, where we're in a desert, where we wonder if God is even still there? What could it be in our lives? We have multiple temptations to walk away. We have the societies and the cultural choices of our world today. But I think it's much deeper than that. I think there's things much deeper in our hearts. A longing that we still have to hang on to something, to be like others. And those temptations, those challenges, I truly believe we have to be very careful, and as we sometimes say, guard our heart. I would actually say, rather than guard, inspect our heart. What am I longing for? Am I longing to walk with Jesus and experience him daily? Or am I longing to be on the very edge where I'm just kind of sort of acquainted with Jesus? Where do we land? Where does our heart long to be? So I'm asking myself those questions. I challenge you to ask yourself, what does your heart long for? I want to long for Jesus more than ever before, and yet I know that that in itself is going to be a war within me. That war that Paul talks about, that he does what he does not want to do, and what he wants to do, he does not do. The heart and the mind and the struggle. But I think we can give those things to God. I think we can invite him to work on our hearts and transform us. He is the true character transformer. So as Israel had to go through this massive transformation over after 20 years, as Samuel reintroduced them to worshiping God, may we also let God work on our hearts and transform our hearts, that we will daily desire to be with Jesus. That is my desire, to daily be with Jesus. I hope it's yours too. Until next time.